It may be small, but it's mighty. ROG Ally's compact size hides some serious power thanks to the AMD Ryzen Z1 series APU hiding under the chassis. And thanks to FSR 3 and AFMF, you've got an arsenal of technologies that can generate extra frames and make your games play smoother than a buttered ice rink. Here's how to get a serious FPS boost with FSR and AFMF. Hello and welcome to ROG Global, where we're definitely guilty of keeping our eye on that frame counter in the corner in even the most spectacular virtual landscapes. Frame rate matters, and Fidelity FX Super Resolution, or just FSR to its close friends, is a suite of tools that gives you more. So, first things first, how does that work then? Well, FSR's evolved over time. The first version was an upscaler that rendered your game at a lower resolution, easier on your hardware and thus higher frame rate, then scaled those same frames back up again so that it looked like the game was running at your desired, more demanding resolution. Pretty smart. Next came FSR 2, which threw temporal information into the algorithm to achieve an even higher upscaled frame together in the final render that hits your monitor. FSR 3 took a big leap, introducing frame generation technology. It works by analysing that same temporal data that powered FSR 2, using it to generate new frames that slot between the ones being rendered the old-fashioned way. Higher frame rate for free. Not bad, FSR 3. Not bad. FSR 3 means that you can crank up the graphics settings higher than you could have before and enjoy the best fidelity at a smoother frame rate. Or in a competitive gaming setting, running your game as fast as your monitor's refresh rate allows to ensure you're getting maximum information about your targets, empowering you to pull off those laser-guided flick shots. It's worth noting that FSR is integrated directly into the game by that game's developer, which means you don't get any glitches around UI elements or text like you sometimes see using motion interpolation tech on modern TVs. Latency's lower too thanks to optimizations from AMD in the frame generation pipeline. On the flip side, this means that your game does need to support FSR frame generation natively for you to enjoy the benefits. It doesn't just apply itself over any game. Head over to rog.asus.com for a list of games which support FSR 3 frame generation. If your game does support it, to enable it, you just need to head into the Graphics or Display Settings menu, look for the AMD Fidelity FX Super Resolution 3 setting, and turn Frame Generation on. AMD also recommends turning on a frame limiter or VSync to keep your frame rate within the display's refresh range. And remember that the higher the frame rate that you're getting natively before turning on frame generation, the lower the latency will be and the smoother the experience overall. It's best to target 60 FPS natively, then push the limits from there.
Good evening, citizens. I need...
Need what? Some spare parts? Hey, there's a mechanic up the road.
You are not the only ankle breaker on this basketball court.
Okay, cool, great. FSR 3 magics up extra frames for free. Got it. Quick question. What if my favourite game of all time, the one that I play for 23.9 hours every day, doesn't support it? Well, that's where AFMF comes in. Although it might look like a sweary acronym, it actually refers to AMD Fluid Motion Frames, a cool tech that does a similar job to FSR 3 frame generation without the need for developers to implement it per game. That means it works on a much larger library of titles. However, that does mean that it's not working with as much information as FSR 3. It doesn't have motion vectors to incorporate, and UI and text elements will be part of the newly generated frames. All of which is to say, if your game supports FSR 3, you'll see the benefits of that native support versus using AFMF alone. AFMF's just nice to have in your back pocket, much like the Ally itself, when FSR 3 is not available. A few things to keep in mind here. Once again, the higher the frame rate that you're starting with, the better the experience using AFMF, and you will need to ensure that your game's running in full screen exclusive mode, as AFMF doesn't work in windowed mode. You'll want to set your Ally's display to 120Hz in-game with VSync disabled, which might introduce some screen tearing if you get frames over 120 FPS, so you might want to limit your base frame rate to something below this. With most games, a 60 FPS cap will ensure consistent frame pacing, but what you choose is up to you. Also, while AFMF works in thousands of games, there may be some games where it does not work, like those with built-in frame rate caps locked to a certain refresh rate. Finally, to enable AFMF, make sure your GPU driver is up to date in Armoury Crate SE. Then head to the Start menu, open the AMD software, and head to Gaming, Graphics, then toggle the AMD Fluid Motion Frames switch on. Note that the way AFMF works, you won't be able to use ROG Ally's built-in real-time monitor to see performance metrics as you play. You can, however, use AMD's own performance overlay if you'd like to monitor FPS, temperatures, and other information. In the AMD software, head to the Performance tab, click the Overlay option on the right side, then toggle the Enable Metrics Overlay option. FSR 3 and AFMF are only a few of AMD's game optimizing technologies. AMD has also made it easier than ever to get the most out of your games with a new feature called AMD Hyper RX. With one click, AMD Hyper RX will turn on a number of performance-boosting settings so you can get straight back to gaming. Just turn Hyper RX on in the AMD Adrenalin software under Gaming, Graphics. For example, if the game in question is in AMD's hyper-tuned games lists, enabling Hyper RX will automatically set Radeon Super Resolution, or RSR, or FSR to the quality preset, alongside AMD Radeon Anti-Lag and AMD Radeon Boost. Hyper RX will instead enable AFMF to ensure that you get the smoothest experience possible. Hyper RX does not currently enable FSR 3 frame generation, so if your game supports the feature, you'll want to turn that on manually in addition to Hyper RX, and disable AFMF if it's already turned on.
I'll see you again. If you do find any pigments out there, don't put them on your tongue. I'm not even going to ask.
There we are then. With these tools in tow, you can now achieve serious gaming performance on the ROG Ally and play all your games anywhere. For more tips on optimizing your games and plenty more, subscribe to the channel, leave us a like if this video was useful to you, and we'll catch you in another one.